Hey guys, tonight we are going to step back in time, not to a grand palace or a famous battlefield, but to a place far more common, and in many ways, far more unsettling. We're journeying into the heart of the Industrial Revolution in Victorian England, but we won't be observing it from a safe distance. No, you'll be experiencing it firsthand. As a child, think of this less as a history lesson, and more as a historical immersion. One where, let's be honest, your chances of making it through the first week are not exactly stellar. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop a comment letting me know what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are traveling to in the dead of night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's seize into tonight's journey together. The world you know is made of mud, mist, and the weary smell of damp wool. Your universe is a tiny, one-room cottage with a thatched roof that leaks when the rain is feeling particularly ambitious. The floor is packed with cold under your bare feet even in the middle of the day. This is your life. It's not a happy one, but it's the only one you've ever known. The rhythm of your existence is dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by the ticking of a clock. You wake when the sky lightens. You work in a small, struggling patch of garden, and you sleep when darkness makes it impossible to do anything else. But something has changed. The harvest failed again. The common lands, the ones your family has grazed a scrawny sheep on for generations, are no longer common. They've been fenced off, privatized, part of a great and relentless tide called the Enclosure Acts. You don't know the official name, of course. You just know that the field you used to be able to use is now guarded by a stone wall and a man with a stern face. Your father's shoulders seem permanently slumped, and your mother's face has a pinched, worried look that never leaves, even in her sleep. The soup is thinner than ever, mostly water with a lonely-looking potato floating in it. Hunger is a constant, dull ache in your belly. Then, one day, a man arrives. A chias not from your village. His coat is a bit too clean. His boots a bit too sturdy. He speaks with a quick, confident accent from the city, a place you've only heard about in hushed, fearful whispers. He doesn't talk to you, of course. He talks to your parents. His voice a low, persuasive hum. You catch words floating on the smoky air of the cottage opportunity. Honest work, a full belly, a roof over their head. Chias talking about you. He paints a picture of a place called a factory. A magnificent, bustling place where children are given a purpose. He says the work is simple, suited for small, nimble fingers. He promises 3 meals a day, a feast compared to your watery soup and a warm bed to sleep in. He makes it sound like an act of charity, a rescue mission. Your parents listen. Their faces a mixture of suspicion and desperate hope. What choice do they have? Really, another winter here could mean, well, no one says the word, but everyone knows. Historians still argue fiercely about this moment, repeated in thousands of cottages just like yours. Was it the necessary, painful birth of the modern world, lifting millions out of rural poverty in the long run, or was it, for your generation, simply a swap of one kind of misery for another, more concentrated and mechanical kind for you, sitting on the cold floor and trying not to shiver? It's not a debate. It's a choice between a slow, quiet starvation in the fields you know, and the promise of food in a city you don't. The fear of the unknown is powerful, but the ache of an empty stomach is stronger. A few days later, you're bundled into what little you own, a threadbare blanket and nothing else. Your mother presses a small, hard piece of bread into your hand, her own fingers rough and cold. You don't cry. You're not even sure you know how. You just feel a hollow sort of quietness inside. You are being sent away to a better life. That is what they tell you. That is what you try to believe. You join a small group of other children, all with the same wide, uncertain eyes and thin frames. You climb onto the back of a cart, the wooden wheels groaning as they begin to turn, carrying you away from the only world you have ever known. The green and brown landscape of your childhood begins to recede, and with every jolt of the cart, you are rolling towards a future defined not by the sun, but by smoke, iron, and the relentless, deafening rhythm of the machine. The journey is a blur of grey skies and jolting discomfort. You huddle with the other children, a silent, shivering bundle of humanity on the rough-hewn planks of the cart. The man who collected you doesn't speak to you. He just sits at the front, his back a rigid wall between you and the world ahead. The landscape changes slowly at first, then all at once, the familiar patchwork of green fields gives way to land that is scarred and pockmarked, dotted with the skeletal frames of mine heads. The air begins to taste different. It's no longer the clean, crisp air of the countryside, tinged with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. This air is heavy, gritty. It coats the back of your throat with the taste of coal dust. Then, you start to see them chimneys. At first, just one or two on the horizon. Thin trickles of smoke rising into the sky. But soon they multiply, becoming a forest of brick towers, each one belching a thick, black plume into the heavens. The sky above is no longer blue or even grey, it's a permanent, dirty brown canopy that hangs over everything. The cart rattles over cobblestones now, and the noise becomes a symphony of chaos. The shouts of people, the clatter of 1,000 iron-shod wheels, the distant, rhythmic pounding that seems to shake the very ground beneath you. The cart lurches to a halt. The man grunts something, and you and the other children scramble down. Your legs stiff and clumsy. You stand in a narrow, crowded street, and for the first time, you see it. Your new home, the factory. It's not a building, it's a monster. It rises up before you, a vast cliff of red brick, stained black with decades of soot. It seems to stretch endlessly in either direction, blocking out what little light filters through the smoky sky. Its walls are pocked with hundreds of windows, dark and vacant squares that stare down at you like the soulless eyes of some immense, unfeeling beast. And rising from its center, a chimney so tall it seems to be trying to punch a hole in the sky, vomiting a constant, furious torrent of black smoke. It's the source of the stain in the air, the reason the sky is no longer blue. This is the heart of the new world you've been brought to. A low, deep rumble emanates from within its walls. It's not just a sound you hear with your ears, it's a vibration you feel in your bones, in the pit of your stomach. It's the sound of 1,000 iron teeth grinding together, a ceaseless, hungry roar that never, ever stopped. This is the Industrial Revolution's incredible, unplanned urban growth made real. Cities like Manchester, where you now stand, exploded in population with no planning for housing, sanitation, or clean water. People were simply packed in, drawn by the gravitational pull of buildings like this one. As you stand there, frozen in a mixture of awe and terror, you notice a strange smell mixed in with the coal smoke. It's a chemical, acrid scent. You look over at a narrow channel of water running nearby. What might once have been a river, but it's not water. It's a thick, sluggish liquid that shimmers with a sickly, unnatural blue color. This was a bizarre and surprisingly common sight in industrial towns. The rivers were used as open sewers for industrial waste, so their color could change daily depending on which dyes the textile mills were using. One day it might be blue, the next a lurid red or a murky green. It's a small, weird detail that tells you everything you need to know about this place. Even the water is dead. Historians have long debated how these structures were viewed by the people who lived in their shadow. For the wealthy industrialists and the politicians in London, they were symbols of national pride, engines of progress and prosperity, the iron and brick proof of Britain's dominance over the world. The poet William Blake, however, saw them differently, famously calling them dark satanic mills. For the people who toiled inside, was there any sense of wonder? Or was it only dread standing here, the child barely tall enough to see over the cart wheel? There is no debate in your mind. You don't see progress or prosperity. You see a beast of brick and smoke, and you have just been delivered to its doorstep. The man gives you a shove from behind, urging you and the others forward. You walk towards a massive gate in a high brick wall that surrounds the factory compound. The gate creaks open, just enough for you all to slip through. As you step across the threshold, the roar from within the walls intensifies tenfold, hitting you like a physical blow. The gate swings shut behind you with a heavy, final clang, the sound of a lock turning. The chaotic sounds of the city street are muffled, replaced by the all-consuming, earth-shaking thunder of the machine. You are inside now. You are in the belly of the beast. The air inside the factory yard is even thicker than it was on the street. It's a cocktail of soot, steam, and that strange chemical time, all underpinned by the smell of hot oil and something else. Something vaguely human, like the scent of too many unwashed bodies packed into a small space. The noise is overwhelming. It's a physical presence that presses in on you from all sides, making your teeth ache and your skull feel like it's vibrating. Another man emerges from a doorway. He's different from the one who brought you here. H.E.S. broad, with a ruddy, cross-looking face, and his clothes are smudged with grease. He doesn't even glance at your faces. He just looks you over like a farmer inspecting new livestock, his eyes calculating. He and the first man exchange a few words you can't hear over the din, and then some coins are passed. You have just been sold. You are ushered into a small, grimy office. There's a desk, a high stool, and a man with a quill pen and a very large ledger book. He looks down at you through a pair of spectacles perched on his nose. Name he barks. Not at you, but at the man who brought you. The man answers for you, and for all the others. Names are called, details are muttered. You hear the scratch of the quill on the paper. This is the moment your new identity is formalized. You are what's known as a parish apprentice. This was a system that, on the surface, looked benevolent. Parish's local government areas were overwhelmed with orphans and children from destitute families, who they were eagerly obliged to care for under the poor laws. To relieve themselves of this financial burden, the parish officials would sign contracts with factory owners, effectively handing over large groups of children. The factory owner, in return for this free labor, was supposed to provide food, housing, and training in a trade. This is the mainstream historical understanding of the system. It was a solution to a social problem. But you, standing on the cold stone floor of this office, are about to learn the reality of that contract. The training is the endless, repetitive task you'll be assigned. The housing and food will be just enough to keep you alive and working. The contract, which you will never see, binds you to this factory, to its owner, until you are 21 years old. You cannot leave. If you run away and are caught, you can be brought back, whipped, and even imprisoned. It is, for all intents and purposes, a form of temporary slavery. You haven't signed a contract for a job. Your life has been signed away in a ledger. Here's a small, bizarre detail about this process. Some of the more scrupulous, or perhaps just more bureaucratic factory owners would insist on a specific clause in their contracts with the parishes. They would demand one able-bodied idiot for every 20 children they took on. The reasoning for this is grimly practical. A child with a developmental disability was seen as less likely to organize an escape, less capable of complaining effectively, and could be made to do the absolute worst and most menial jobs without question. It was a calculated, dehumanizing piece of business logistics. The man with the ledger finishes his scratching. He doesn't look at you. He just waves a hand dismissively. Take them to the prentice house, he says to the broad, greasy man. Prentice house. It sounds almost grand, doesn't it? A house for apprentices. You might imagine a small school or a dormitory. The reality will be something else entirely. The greasy man, who you will come to know only as the overlooker or overseer, grabs you by the shoulder. His grip is like iron. He shoves you and the other children out of the office and across the yard, towards a long, low building squatting in the shadow of the main mill. As you get closer, you realize the windows are barred. Historians still debate the true nature of the parish apprentice system. Some argue that while it was harsh, for many children it was a better alternative than starving in a workhouse or dying of disease on the streets. They point to records of factory owners who did genuinely try to provide some level of care and education. Others argue this is a whitewash of history, that the system was overwhelmingly exploitative. A convenient way for the state to offload its responsibilities onto a system of brutal child labor from which it profited. Was it a flawed rescue attempt or a cynical transaction as the door to the Prentice house creaks open, revealing a dark, foul-smelling interior? You don't need a historian to tell you the answer. You can smell it. You are pushed inside. The door slams shut behind you, and a bolt is thrown. The sudden darkness is broken only by a few slivers of light coming through the grimy, barred windows. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale straw, and human waste. Your journey is over. You have arrived. This isn't a contract. It's a cage, and you have just been locked inside. The man who locked you in is your overlooker, your overseer, your master. His job is simple: to extract the maximum amount of work from you and the other children for the minimum possible cost. He is not paid to be kind. He is paid for productivity, and his own wages often depend on the output of the room he supervises. You are not a child to him, you are a component of the great machine, and his task is to make sure you run as efficiently as possible. He doesn't formally introduce himself. You will learn his name, Mr. Grier, from the fearful whispers of the other children. He leads you out of the Prentice house the next morning before the sun has even considered rising. The yard is dark, lit only by a few flickering gas lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. He marches you and the other new arrivals into the main factory building. If you thought the noise was bad from the outside, it is nothing compared to being inside the belly of the beast. The sound hits you like a tidal wave. It's a deafening, disorienting cacophony of 1,000 moving parts. The thundering rhythm of the power looms, the high-pitched shriek of spinning jennies, the hiss of steam, this slap of leather dots. You can't hear yourself think. You can't hear the person next to you speak. Even if they shout, you can only feel the vibration thrumming through the wooden floorboards into the soles of your feet. This is your new world. A world without conversation. A world of pure, industrial noise. Mr. Grier leads you to a vast room, longer than any field you've ever seen. It's filled, row upon row, with enormous cast iron spinning mules, machines stretching into the gloomy distance. He grabs you by the arm, his fingers digging into your bicep, and points to a small child, maybe a year or two older than you, who is darting in undoubt from under one of the machines. You, Mr. Grier bellows, his voice barely cutting through the din. Watch him, do what he does. This is your welcome. There is no orientation, no safety briefing, no gentle introduction. There is only this: watch and learn, or suffer the consequences. The overlooker is the linchpin of the entire system of factory discipline. His primary tool is fear. The mainstream historical view is that corporal punishment was an accepted part of Victorian life, used in schools, homes, and workplaces. The factory was no exception. The overlooker carries a thick leather strap, the T-strap, often weighted with a piece of metal at the end. You will see it used for the smallest of infractions: talking, looking away from your machine, slowing down, or the most common crime of all, falling asleep. He will use it on boys and girls alike. A sharp, stinging blow across the back or legs that leaves a burning welt. This is the baseline of punishment, the everyday enforcement of the factory's brutal rhythm. But the overlooker's cruelty could be far more inventive. Here's a bizarre and horrifying fact of factory life: the practice of waiting. If a child was persistently late or slow, an overlooker might hang a heavy weight from their neck and force them to walk up and down the factory aisles for an hour. A public shaming designed to terrify the other children into compliance. It was a calculated form of torture, designed for maximum psychological impact. Historians argue about the prevalence of the most extreme forms of abuse. were the stories of children being dipped in cisterns of water or shackled to machines the lurid exceptions, sensationalized by reformers to make their point, or were they a grimly common reality in the more remote and less regulated mills? The evidence from parliamentary reports and personal testimony suggests that while not every overlooker was a monster, the system itself created monsters. When you give one man absolute power over a group of helpless children and reward him for their productivity, cruelty becomes not just possible, but profitable. You watch the other child, your teacher, and you see the fear in his eyes. Every movement is quick, precise, born of a desperate need to avoid attracting the overlooker's attention. You see Mr. Grier patrol the aisles between the machines, his eyes scanning constantly. He is a predator, and you are all his prey. He doesn't just watch for mistakes. He seems to be looking for an excuse, an opportunity to enforce his authority. A girl at a nearby machine, her face pale and smudged with grease, stumbles, maybe from exhaustion. Maybe she just tripped. For a moment, the rhythm of her work is broken. Mr. Grier is there in an instant. You don't hear what he says, but you see the strap rise and fall. The girl flinches, but she doesn't cry out. No one does. To cry out is to show weakness, to draw more attention. She just straightens up, her face a mask of pain, and gets back to work. This is your welcome. This is your first lesson. The factory is a kingdom, and the overlooker is its absolute, and absolutely terrifying king. Your job is not just to work. Your primary job is to become invisible, to blend into the thundering chaos, and to pray he never has a reason to learn your name. You are now part of the machine. Your life is no longer measured by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the factory bell. It shrieks you awake in the pre-dawn blackness, and it releases you, staggering with fatigue, long after night has fallen. But the most constant presence in your life, more so than the overlooker, more so than the gnawing hunger in your belly, is the noise. It is the first thing you are aware of in the morning and the last thing you hear at night, even when you are back in the apprentice house. The low, distant rumble of the mill is always there, a constant reminder of where you must return. But inside the spinning room, it is a physical assault. The sound is a solid wall you walk into every day. Let's try to build this soundscape. It's not one single noise, but 1,000 layers of mechanical violence. The foundation is the deep, rhythmic, earth-shaking thump-thump-thump of the steam engine. Located in a separate engine house but felt through the very fabric of the building, it's the factory's iron heartbeat. Layered on top of that is the sound of the doctor system. A huge, spinning flywheel transfers power to a network of overhead shafts running the length of the ceiling. From these shafts, dozens of wide leather belts drop down to power the individual machines. These belts, constantly sapping and whirring, create a constant, dizzying rush of sound, like a permanent, gale-force wind. Then comes the noise of your specific area, the spinning room. The machines here are called spinning mules. They are monstrously large, up to 150 feet long, with a moving carriage that glides back and forth on a track. The carriage makes a whirring, clattering sound as it moves out, drawing the cotton fibers into thread, and then a loud clack as it slams back into its starting position. Now, imagine 100 of these in one room, each one a symphony of whirs, clitoris, and clacks, all moving at slightly different times. The result is a chaotic, unpredictable, and deafening roar. This constant exposure to extreme noise is a well-documented hazard of industrial work. It led to a condition workers called weaver's deafness, which we now know as noise-induced hearing loss. By the time you are a teenager, you will likely have lost a significant portion of your hearing. You'll find yourself shouting in normal conversation, and you'll suffer from a constant ringing in your ears, tinnitus, that will stay with you for the rest of your life. A permanent echo of the factory floor. You learn to communicate without words. A nod, a jerk of the head, or specific hand gesture. You develop a form of sign language out of necessity. a silent vocabulary of survival. You learn to read lips, to understand a command from the shape of the overlooker's mouth across the roaring expanse of the room. Silence becomes a precious, forgotten luxury. Here's a small, peculiar detail that adds another layer to this mechanical orchestra: the sound of the bobbins. The bobbins are the small spools that the finished thread is wound onto. When they are full, they are dropped into large metal carts. A full cart of bobbins being pushed across the wooden floor creates a unique, high-pitched, rattling clatter. But more than that, children, in a moment of idleness or play, would sometimes take a single bobbin and spin it on the floor like a top. The sound of a single bobbin spinning created a high-pitched, almost musical whizzing sound that could, for a brief moment, cut through the lower frequency chaos of the main machinery. It was a tiny, human sound in a vast, inhuman soundscape, and it was a sound the overlooker listened for. A spinning bobbin meant a child was not working. Historians often focus on the physical dangers of the factory, the mangled limbs and the diseased lungs. But the psychological impact of the noise is harder to quantify, yet just as profound. They still debate the full extent of the mental health consequences. Did this constant, inescapable noise contribute to the high rates of what was then called melancholy or nervous exhaustion? It's impossible to prove definitively, but it's hard to imagine how it couldn't. It creates a state of permanent anxiety, a feeling of being constantly on edge. You can never fully relax, never let your guard down. The noise is a cage for your mind, just as the factory walls are a cage for your body. You begin to internalize the rhythm. The thump-thump of the steam engine syncs with your own heartbeat. The clack of the mule carriage becomes the punctuation mark of your day. You find yourself moving in time with the machines, your small body swaying with the rhythm of the loom. You are becoming a cog. Years later, long after you've left this place, you will find yourself in a quiet field or a silent room, and in that silence, you will feel a sense of unease, of something missing. You will strain your ears, and you will hear it, the ghost of the machine, the phantom roar of the factory, a symphony that has burned itself into your memory and will never truly leave. It is the soundtrack of your childhood, the music of a stolen youth. Your job title, if such a grand word could be applied to your existence, is scavenger. It is a role reserved almost exclusively for the smallest and youngest of the children, those who are 6, 7, or 8 years old. Your size, which makes you useless for heavier work, is your primary qualification for one of the most dangerous jobs in the entire mill. Your workplace is not at a machine, but under it. You work beneath the giant, thundering spinning mules. Your task is simple to describe but terrifying to perform. As the cotton is spun into thread, small tufts and scraps fall to the floor. This waste cotton is valuable. Nothing in the factory is ever truly thrown away. It is your job to collect it. The spinning mule has a carriage that moves back and forth on a track. It glides out, pulling and twisting the cotton fibers, a process that takes about a minute. Then, it slides back to its starting position. You have a window of time, a matter of seconds, while the carriage is at its furthest point, to do your work. Here is your dance. The moment the carriage begins to move outwards, you dart into the space underneath. The ceiling is low, just a few feet of clearance. So you have to crawl on your hands and knees, or lie flat on your stomach, your face just inches from the greasy, oil-soaked floorboards. You scramble, your small hands sweeping up the fluffy white scraps of cotton, stuffing them into a small bag tied around your waist. You are always listening, not with your ears, which are already ringing from the constant noise, but with your whole body. You feel the vibration of the machine through the floor. You learn its rhythm, the precise moment it will complete its outward journey and begin its deadly return. You have to be out of the way before that carriage, a piece of cast iron and wood weighing hundreds of pounds, slides back. If you are not, it will crush you. This is the primary, well-known danger of being a scavenger. Testimonies from the era are filled with accounts of children who were too slow, too tired, or who simply misjudged the timing. The injuries were horrific. A crushed leg, a broken back. For many, it was fatal. The machine did not stop. If you were hurt, you were dragged out, and another small child was sent in to take your place. But there were other dangers, less dramatic but just as constant. The floor is slick with oil that drips from the machinery's gears. It soaks into your clothes, into your skin, leaving you with a permanent smell of rancid grease and a host of skin rashes and boils. The air under the machine is even worse than in the main room. It's thick with cotton dust, a substance called fly, which you breathe in with every gasp. It clings to the oil on your face, creating a grimy mask by the end of the day. Here is a strange, lesser-known detail of your work. The space under the mule is a maze of moving parts, even when the carriage is extended. There are belts, pulleys, and gears constantly turning. The most insidious of these are the loose long, fast-moving doctor belts. They are often unfenced. As you crawl, your loose, ragged clothing or your hair can easily get caught. You learn to make yourself as small as possible, to tuck in every loose thread, to perform a strange, crab-like scuttle to avoid them. You feel the wind of the belts on your cheek as they whip past you. The question of why such a dangerous system was allowed to exist is one that historians still grapple with. From a purely economic standpoint, stopping the machine to clean it was inefficient. Production was king. The time it took for the mule to complete one cycle was considered downtime, and the factory owner wanted to utilize every second, so they sent in the children. Was it pure, callous greed, or a kind of progress blindness? An inability to see the human cost of a system that was generating unprecedented wealth for the nation? The answer, most likely, is a grim combination of both. You live your day in these short, frantic bursts of activity, a minute of terror, followed by a few seconds of relative safety as you retreat from under the machine, only to prepare to do it all again, over and over, for 12, 14, 16 hours a day. Your knees are raw, your back aches, and your mind is a blur of fear and exhaustion. You see the overlooker, Mr. Grier, pacing at the end of the machine oil. He's not watching the machine, he's watching you. He's watching to make sure you don't miss a single scrap of cotton. He's watching to make sure you don't hesitate. If you're too slow going in, you get the strap. If you're too slow coming out, well, the machine delivers its own punishment. This is your dance, the scavenger's dance. It is a dance between a child and a machine, a terrifying choreography dictated by the relentless rhythm of the Industrial Revolution. Each successful dart in undoubt is a small victory, a tiny act of survival. But you know, with the cold certainty that only a child in constant danger can possess, that you only have to lose the rhythm once. After a few months, your body begins to grow. It's a slow, barely perceptible change, but it's enough. One day, the overlooker, Mr. Grier, yanks you from your place under the spinning mule. You are becoming too big to be a scavenger. Your value in that role is diminishing. You are not dismissed. You are reassigned. You are now a pieceur. This is considered a step up, a promotion in the factory's brutal hierarchy. It's the job most of the children and many of the women do. The work is more complex than scavenging, requiring a specific skill. But in some ways, it is even more relentlessly stressful. Your new domain is the spinning machine itself, not the space beneath it. Your job is to watch the threads. The spinning mule, in its slow, clattering journey, spins raw cotton into hundreds of individual threads, all at once. But sometimes, a thread breaks. When this happens, a tiny, almost invisible strand snaps and whips loose. If it's not fixed, the bobbin it's supposed to be winding onto will be empty, and the machine's output will be flawed. Your task, as a pieceur, is to mend that broken thread, and you have to do it while the machine is still running at full speed. Here is the motion you must learn, a motion you will repeat thousands of times a day until it becomes an unconscious reflex. You spot the broken thread. You reach into the forest of moving spindles. Your small, nimble fingers, the very reason you were hired for this job, finding the two broken ends. With a quick, deft twist, you roll them back together. The thread is joined. The spinning continues, and you are already scanning for the next break. The mainstream historical understanding of this job focuses on its contribution to the efficiency of the textile industry. This division of labor, with adults managing the machines and children performing these delicate, repetitive tasks, was a cornerstone of the factory system. It allowed for continuous production, a key innovation that drove the massive output of the mills. But the reality of the work is in the details. You are constantly leaning over the machine. The spinning mule's carriage moves back and forth, and you must move with it, walking several miles a day just pacing alongside your assigned section. The frame of the machine is at an awkward height, forcing you into a perpetually stooped position that puts a constant strain on your back. The real danger, however, is in the act of piecing itself. You are reaching into a dense field of moving parts. The spindles are spinning at incredible speeds. The carriage is moving. A moment's distraction, a slip of the hand, and your fingers could be caught, crushed, or torn by the machinery. Many children lost the tops of their fingers this way. It was a common, accepted injury. You would be sent away to wrap it in a rag, and be expected back at your post as soon as the bleeding stopped. Now for a truly bizarre and specific hazard of the job, one you wouldn't even think of: the air itself. The spinning process creates a huge amount of static electricity in the dry, hot air of the factory. To combat this, and to make the cotton fibers less brittle, the air was oft unkept deliberately, oppressively humid. But this static charge had a strange effect on human hair. For the girls, and any boys with longer hair, as you leaned over the machine, the static could literally pull your hair towards the moving spindles. If a single strand got caught, your entire scalp could be pulled into the machine in an instant. This horrific accident, known as scalping, was a terrifyingly real risk. Some of the more safety-conscious factory owners would insist on children wearing bonnets or caps. But in many mills, the rule was lax or non-existent. Historians still debate the psychological toll of this kind of work. It required a state of constant, unwavering hypervigilance, unlike the scavenger's job, which was bursts of terror followed by brief respites. The PSR's job was a continuous, low-grade, simmering anxiety. Your eyes are always scanning. Your body is always tense. You can never let your mind wander, never daydream. A moment of inattention doesn't just mean a reprimand from the overlooker, it could mean a life-altering injury. Does this relentless focus, forced upon a developing brain, have long-term effects? It's a question modern psychology might be able to answer. But for the historians studying your time, it remains a subject of concerned speculation. You stand at your post, your small frame hunched over the roaring, cluttering machine. Your eyes dart back and forth, scanning the endless field of white threads. Snap, there's one. Your hand darts in, a blur of motion. Twist, it's fixed. Your eyes are already moving, searching for the next tiny failure in this vast, mechanical system. You are no longer just a component of the machine, you are a living, breathing, incredibly fragile part of its internal workings. Your nimble fingers are now the property of the factory, the tools that ensure the great engine of progress never falters, not even for a second. The bell screams. It's 5 in the morning. It feels like you only just closed your eyes. A moment of black, dreamless exhaustion before the shriek of the iron bell drags you back to consciousness. Outside, the world is pitch black and cold. It doesn't matter if it's the heart of winter or the height of summer, your day begins in darkness. You and the other children tumble out of your crude bunks in the Prentice house. There's no time to wash, no time to think. You pull on the same stiff, greasy clothes you wore yesterday and the day before. You are not a person waking up, you are a part being activated. You shuffle out into the yard and join the silent, sleepy river of workers heading into the maw of the factory. The moment you step inside, the 16-hour day begins. 16 hours. It's a number so large it's difficult to comprehend. Your life is cleaved into two parts: the 8 hours you are allowed for sleep and food, and the 16 hours you belong to the machine. This grueling workday is one of the most well-documented and infamous aspects of child labor during the Industrial Revolution. It was the standard, not the exception. Your morning is a blur of repetitive motion. As a PSR, your eyes scan the threads. Your hands dot and twist. Your feet pace back and forth alongside the clattering mule. The first few hours are manageable. The gnawing hunger in your stomach is a familiar companion. But as the morning wears on, a deep, bone-wearing fatigue begins to set in. Your shoulders ache. Your back screams in protest from the constant stooping. Your eyelids feel heavy, weighted with lead. Around you, a bell rings for a break. It is usually 40 minutes. You don't leave the factory floor. You sit amongst the silent, waiting machines. The air is still thick with cotton dust. A woman brings around your meal. It's a lump of oat cake, dry and coarse, and a can of water. You devour it in minutes, the rough texture scraping your throat. This is not a moment of rest, it's a refueling stop, just enough to give you the energy to continue. The afternoon is the hardest part of the day. The heat in the spinning room becomes oppressive. The air thick and stagnant. The relentless noise, which you had almost managed to push to the back of your mind, becomes a physical weight, pressing down on you. This is when the overlooker, Mr. Grier, is at his most vigilant. He knows this is when exhaustion leads to mistakes. His shadow falling across your machine is a jolt of pure adrenaline, a more effective stimulant than any food. You see him grab a boy who is swaying on his feet, his head nodding with sleep, a sharp word, a crack of the leather strap, and the boy is jolted back into terrified wakefulness. Here's a small, cruel detail of this endless day, the illusion of the clock. In some factories, there is a clock on the wall. You would watch its hands, willing them to move, measuring your life in the slow, agonizing crawl from 1 minute to the next. But some of the less scrupulous mill owners were known to tamper with the clocks. On a day when work was behind schedule, the clock might be slowed down, stealing 10, 15, 20 minutes from your break time or adding it to the end of the day. You might feel in your bones that you've worked longer than usual, but the clock, the ultimate authority, says otherwise. It was a form of gaslighting on an industrial scale, making you doubt your own senses, your own exhaustion. The long hours were a subject of fierce debate. Reformers argued it was inhumane and crippled the country's future generations. Factory owners, on the other hand, presented a united front. They argued that the economics of the factory required long-running times to be profitable. They claimed that the work was light and easy for children, far less strenuous than farm labor. Some even made the paternalistic argument that long hours kept the children out of trouble, preventing them from falling into vice and idleness. Historians today still analyze these economic arguments, trying to determine if such hours were really a financial necessity, or simply a way to maximize profits at a staggering human cost. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests the latter. As evening approaches, the factory is lit by flickering, hazy gas lamps. The light is poor, casting long, spooky shadows that make the moving machinery seem even more monstrous. Your movements become sluggish, your reflexes dull. This is the most dangerous time of day. More accidents happen in the last 2 hours of the shift than in the previous 14 combined. Your tired mind makes it harder to judge the speed and distance of the moving parts. A hand that was quick and nimble in the morning is now clumsy and slow. Finally, at 9 o'clock, the bell screams its release. The great steam engine sighs to a halt, and for the first time in 16 hours, a wave of near silence washes over the room. The sudden quiet is as disorienting as the noise itself. You can hear the ringing in your own ears, the shuffling feet of 100 exhausted children. You don't walk back to the printer's house. You stumble. You are a ghost, hollowed out by the day's labor. There is another meager meal. Then you collapse onto your straw pallet. Too tired to even dream. You fall into a black pit of unconsciousness, knowing that in just a few short hours, the bell will scream again, and the 16-hour prison of your day will begin anew. You live in a state of perpetual hunger. The work you do burns an incredible number of calories, but the fuel you are given is meager, monotonous, and of the poorest quality. Your diet is not designed for your health or growth. It is calculated for maximum economy, the absolute minimum required to keep you on your feet for another 16-hour day. Your day starts with breakfast, eaten on the move as you shuffle from the apprentice house to the factory floor. It is almost always the same: a piece of oat cake or a bowl of porridge. The oat cake is hard and dry, scraping the roof of your mouth. The porridge, or gruel as it's more accurately called, is a thin, watery slop made from oats or cornmeal, often lumpy and bland. Sometimes it has a slightly sour taste, a sign that the oats were cheap and already beginning to spoil. The midday meal, your 40-minute break on the factory floor, is the most substantial of the day, which isn't saying much. Usually, it's a boiled potato, sometimes served with a small lump of lard for flavor and calories. On a good day, there might be a piece of bread. The bread is dark and heavy, nothing like the light, white bread the factory owner and his family eat. It's made with cheap flour, sometimes bulked out with less savory ingredients to make it go further. Your final meal comes after the workday is over, back in the dim, smelly printer's house. It's often a repeat of breakfast, another bowl of thin, watery gruel. This is the meal you eat with the deepest exhaustion, your body screaming for nutrients, only to be given this unsatisfying slop. You go to your bunk with your stomach still aching, a hollow feeling that never truly goes away. This sparse diet is a well-documented part of the factory apprentice experience. The records of parish officials and factory reformers are filled with descriptions of the food given to children. It was a diet almost completely devoid of fresh fruit, vegetables, or meat. The lack of variety and essential nutrients had devastating effects on your growing body. Scurvy, caused by a lack of vitamin C, was not uncommon, leading to bleeding gums and aching joints. Rickets, from a lack of vitamin D and calcium, resulted in soft, misshapen bones. You are constantly tired, not just from the work, but from a deep, cellular level malnutrition. Now for a peculiar and disgusting piece of information about your food: the concept of the slop pail. In some of the worst run mills, the food for the apprentices was sourced from the owner's table. But not in the way you might think. The leftover scraps from the master's family meals would be thrown into a bucket, the slop pail. This mixture of leftover meat, gristle, vegetables, and gravy would then be boiled down, sometimes with added oats or flour, to create a stew. This was then served to the children. The quality was entirely dependent on what the master's family had chosen not to eat. Sometimes, the pail would sit for days, the contents beginning to ferment. This was not just about saving money, it was a powerful, daily reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. You ate the literal garbage of your betters. The issue of food became a central point of contention for reformers. Was it the factory owner's responsibility to provide a nutritious diet, or simply to provide enough sustenance to prevent starvation? Many owners argued that the food they provided was better than what the children would have received in their destitute rural homes or in a parish workhouse. They weren't necessarily wrong. For a child on the absolute brink of starvation, a guaranteed bowl of gruel was an improvement. Historians continued to debate this grim calculus. Was a diet that slowly destroyed your health from the inside out truly better than the risk of a quicker death from famine? It's a question that highlights the brutal choices of the era. You are always thinking about food. The hunger sharpened your senses. You can smell the slightly richer food the overlookers eat. You fantasize about an apple, a piece of cheese, a slice of roasted meat. This obsession leads to small, desperate acts. Some children would scrape the grease from the machine bearings, not to eat, but to use as a kind of butter on their dry oat cake. If a piece of food was dropped on the filthy, oil-soaked floor, it would be snatched up and eaten in an instant. Dirt and all. Once a week, on Sunday, the meal might be slightly better, perhaps a thin, fatty broth with a few scraps of bacon in it. This was considered a feast, a luxury to be savored. It was also a tool of control. The promise of a slightly better meal on Sunday was another reason to endure the horrors of the week. Your body adapts in cruel ways. It learns to run on empty. Your growth is stunted. You are thin and pale, with the listless eyes of someone who is never truly nourished. You are being shaped by the factory, not just by its work and its punishments, but by the very fuel it deigns to give you. You are a machine being run on the cheapest, foulest oil, and your internal parts are slowly, inevitably, grinding themselves to dust. You are always breathing dust, from the moment you enter the factory until you leave. The air is thick with it. It's a fine, white, almost invisible mist of cotton fibers, a substance the workers call fly or fluff. It hangs in the gaslight, coats every surface with a soft, downy layer, and fills your lungs with every breath you take. The spinning room is the heart of the problem. The raw cotton bales are opened here, and the initial carding process which aligns the fibers throws massive amounts of dust into the air. The spinning mules themselves, moving at high speeds, agitate the air constantly, ensuring the fly never has a chance to settle. The windows are kept shut, often nailed closed, to maintain the high temperature and humidity needed for the cotton threads to be pliable. There is no ventilation. You are working inside a sealed container, breathing a toxic soup. At first, you just cough. A dry, persistent hack that you share with every other worker in the room. Your throat feels perpetually scratchy, and you are always thirsty, though the tepid water you're given does little to soothe it. After a few months, you start to bring up phlegm in the mornings, thick and grey, speckled with the cotton fibers that have settled in your airways overnight. This is the beginning of a condition that was rampant among textile workers, a disease known by many names: brown lung, Monday fever, or, more clinically, by SSI. This is the mainstream historical knowledge about the health impacts of the mills. It's a respiratory disease caused specifically by inhaling cotton dust. It's not the same as the black lung that afflicted coal miners. It's a unique affliction of the textile world. The disease has a strange and cruel rhythm. It gets its name, Monday fever, because the symptoms are always worst on the first day back at work after the single day of rest on Sunday. On Monday morning, your chest feels tight, as if a band is squeezing your lungs. You are short of breath, wheezing as you try to keep up with the pace of the machine. As the week goes on, your body seems to acclimatize slightly, and the symptoms lessen, only to return with a vengeance the following Monday. Over the years, this cycle of acute illness transforms into a chronic, irreversible condition. The constant inflammation scars your lung tissue, reducing their capacity. By the time you are in your late 20s or early 30s, you will have the breathing capacity of an elderly person. Any physical exertion will leave you gasping for air. You will never be able to run again. You will have a permanent, rattling cough that will stay with you for the rest of your short life. Now for a bizarre and particularly grim detail about the environment. The dust was not just cotton. To make the cotton threads stronger and heavier and therefore more profitable, as they were sold by weight, factory owners would engage in a practice called steaming or sizing. They would intentionally add other substances to the air and the cotton. The most common was china clay, a fine white powder that was blasted into the room as a dust cloud. This clay would bind to the cotton fibers, making them heavier. Other starches and even metallic dusts were also used. So the air you are breathing is not just organic cotton fiber, it's a chemical and mineral cocktail designed to cheat the scales, and it is lodging itself deep within your lungs. The existence and cause of SSI was a subject of intense and protracted debate. For decades, factory owners and their doctors flatly denied that the dust was harmful. They blamed the workers' respiratory problems on their supposed poor lifestyle. their drinking habits, or the generally polluted air of the industrial cities. They argued it was just a smoker's cough for common bronchitis. It took until the 20th century for the medical establishment to definitively link cotton dust to this specific, debilitating disease. Historians who study the history of occupational medicine see this as a classic case of corporate denial, where profits were prioritized over worker health, and scientific uncertainty was exploited to avoid implementing safer working conditions, like proper ventilation. You see the effects of the dust all around you. You see older workers, men and women in their 30s who look twice their age, who have to stop and lean against a wall, gasping for breath after walking the length of the room. You hear the constant chorus of coughing, a sound as much a part of the factory's symphony as the clatter of the machines. You try to adapt. You learn to breathe through a damp rag held over your mouth, but it's clumsy and gets in the way of your work, earning you a cuff from the overlooker. You learn to take shallower breaths, but there is no escape. The dust is in your hair, on your skin, in your food. It has become a part of you. You are being slowly suffocated, not by a sudden lack of air, but by the very air you are forced to breathe. The wealth of the British Empire, built on textiles, is being woven from threads of cotton and from the scarred, ruined tissue of your lungs. The greatest crime a child can commit in the factory is to fall asleep. It is an act of rebellion, not of intent, but of the body itself. It is your exhausted muscles and your starved brain crying out for a rest that the factory bell will not grant. And for this involuntary protest, the punishment is swift, cruel, and designed to be memorable. The battle against sleep is a silent, internal war waged every single afternoon and into the gaslit evenings. Your eyelids become impossibly heavy. The monotonous, rhythmic clatter of the machinery, which was once a jarring assault, now becomes a hypnotic lullaby, coaxing you into unconsciousness. You find yourself in a state of semi-awareness, a waking dream. Your hands might continue their task piecing the thread, for instance out of pure muscle memory, while your mind has drifted far away. This is a state the overlookers are experts at spotting. A slight sway in your posture, a momentary slump of the shoulders, a head that nods just a fraction too low. They patrol the aisles like sharks sensing blood in the water, and they have a whole arsenal of punishments designed specifically to combat what they see as laziness. The most common punishment is, of course, the strap. A short, stinging blow across the back is usually enough to jolt you back to a state of terrified alertness. The pain is a powerful stimulant, but for repeat offenders, or for those who collapse entirely, the punishments escalate. A frequent and well-documented method was dousing with water. The overlooker would keep a bucket of cold water nearby for this very purpose. If he found you asleep, he would throw the entire bucket over you. The shock of the cold water was immediate and jarring. You would be left soaked, shivering, for the rest of your shift. In the hot, humid spinning room, this might be merely uncomfortable. In the colder months, it could lead to sickness, which was just another reason for punishment. The most extreme version of this water torture was the cistern. Most factories had a large cistern or tank of water, used for the steam engines or for fire suppression. A child who was repeatedly caught sleeping might be dragged by the overlooker to this cistern and have their head forced under the water. They would be held there for a few seconds, long enough for panic to set in, before being pulled up, sputtering and gasping for air. This was not just a punishment, it was a spectacle. It was performed in front of the other children as a warning. This is what happens when you let your body win. This particular form of abuse, being donked or cisterned, is a key piece of evidence cited by social reformers of the era, like Richard O'Stelly and John Fielden, in their campaigns against child labor. It was so brutal, so obviously torturous, that it shocked the sensibilities of the middle-class public who read about it in pamphlets and newspapers. Here's a small, sad detail that highlights the children's desperation to stay awake. They would develop their own painful methods of self-stimulation. You might pinch the inside of your arm, digging your fingernails into your own skin to create a point of pain to focus on. Some children would find a sharp piece of metal and prick themselves. These small acts of self-harm were a desperate attempt to control their own consciousness, to inflict a lesser pain to avoid the greater pain of the overlooker's wrath. The historical debate around this issue is not whether these punishments happen, they are too well documented to deny. The debate is about their frequency. Were these sadistic acts the daily norm in every factory, or were they the exceptional behavior of a few truly monstrous overlookers? Later sensationalized to fuel the reform movement, factory owners and their sympathizers claimed the stories were exaggerated, the isolated acts of a few bad apples. Reformers argued that the system itself, which demanded 16 hours of labor from a malnourished child, made such outcomes inevitable. The exhaustion was systemic, so the cruelty required to combat it had to be systemic too. You learn the subtle signs of encroaching sleep, a blurring of your vision, a ringing in your ears that is different from the machine noise tinnitus. You try to fight it. You shake your head. You bite your lip. You shift your weight from foot to foot. You watch the other children, and you see them fighting the same battle. You see a girl across the aisle whose eyes are closed for just a second too long. You see the overlooker's shadow fall upon her. You flinch. Even though the blow is not for you, her pain is a reminder. It sharpens your own senses for a few more precious minutes. The factory, in its perverse logic, has turned your body's most basic need, the need for rest, into a punishable offense. You are not just fighting the machine, the dust, and the hunger. You are fighting yourself. Your own biology has become your enemy. And in this battle, waged in the dim, roaring cathedral of industry, you know that you will eventually, inevitably, lose. You can only hope that when you do, the punishment is one you can survive. The machines are hungry. They are indifferent to flesh and bone. They are composed of cast iron and unforgiving gears, and they do not distinguish between a cotton thread and a human finger. In the factory, the risk of mutilation is not a distant possibility, it is a constant, daily presence. The factory floor is a landscape of exposed, moving parts. In your era, the concept of machine guarding or safety shields is virtually non-existent. It's seen as an unnecessary expense, something that would get in the way of cleaning and maintenance. The doctor belts slap and wear. The gears mesh together with crushing force, and the spinning spindles rotate at blinding speed. All in open air, inches from your body. Accidents are a routine occurrence. They are so common that they are simply considered part of the cost of doing business. You see them happen all the time. As a PSAR, the most common injuries involve your hands, reaching into the fast-moving machinery to mend a thread. A moment of misjudgment, perhaps caused by the exhaustion you're always fighting, is all it takes. A finger gets caught between two gears and is crushed. The top joint of a finger is sheared off by a spindle. These are considered minor injuries. You see a boy, no older than you, cry out. He pulls his hand back from the machine, and it's a bloody mess. The overlooker, Mr. Grier, doesn't rush to help. He scowls, annoyed at the disruption to production. The boy is sent away, not to a doctor, but to the corner of the room to wrap his hand in a piece of rag. There is no first aid kit, no medical professional on site. The most advanced medical care you can hope for is a bucket of water. If the bleeding stops, you are expected to return to your post. You learn to work with a bandaged hand, with the constant, throbbing pain. This lack of safety features is one of the most damning indictments of the early factory system. The technology to make the machines safer existed, but it was not implemented. The political will and the legal framework to force factory owners to protect their workers had not yet been established. The mainstream historical view is that the drive for profit far outstripped any concern for worker safety. Now, let's talk about a more specific and bizarre type of accident, one related to your bare feet. You are, like most of the child laborers, do not have shoes. Leather is a luxury you cannot afford. You work barefoot on the wooden floors, which are slick with oil and littered with sharp metal shards. A common accident occurred when a child would drop one of the heavy iron bobbins. It would land on their foot, crushing the delicate bones. But there was another, stranger danger. As you worked, you might step on a nail or a sharp piece of metal on the floor. The initial wound was painful, but the real danger was infection. In the filthy environment of the factory, any open wound was likely to become infected. Tetanus, or lupkerhood, was a frequent and terrifying consequence of a seemingly minor puncture wound. You would see a child with a small cut on their foot suddenly become ill, their muscles stiffening until their jaw was locked shut. It was almost always fatal. All from walking barefoot. Historians and economists still sometimes debate the rationale behind the lack of safety measures. Was it purely a matter of cost? Or was there also a prevailing cultural attitude at play? Some argue that this was an era accustomed to high rates of death and injury. Life was cheap. In a world without modern medicine, where a simple infection could kill anyone, rich or poor, perhaps the dangers of the factory were seen as just another part of a generally hazardous existence. This view suggests that our modern obsession with safety is a luxury they couldn't conceive of. Others argue this is an apology for inexcusable negligence, that the value of a human life was clearly understood, but the value of a poor child's life was simply set at a very, very low price. The most horrific accidents are the ones that are instantly disabling or fatal. You have heard the stories, and sometimes you see the aftermath. A scavenger crushed under a mule carriage, a girl's hair caught in a spinning shelf, scalping her, a worker's arm caught in a dot and torn from its socket. When these major accidents happen, the machine is stopped, but only for long enough to remove the body. The other children are pushed back to work, their faces pale with shock, while the floor is still stained. There is no compensation. If you lose a finger, an arm, or your ability to work, you are simply dismissed. Your contract is terminated. You are now useless to the factory. You are turned out onto the streets of the city, a crippled child with no family and no means of support. Your injury is your problem alone. You learn to move with a cautious, practiced grace around the machines. You develop a sixth sense for danger, an awareness of the space your body occupies down to the last inch. You know exactly how far you can reach, exactly where you can step. This constant, low-level fear is exhausting. Another layer of stress on your already overburdened mind. The machines are not just your workplace, they are your predators, and you are a small, soft animal navigating a forest of hungry iron. You've done it. A moment of destruction. Your mind blurred by the 16-hour haze. Your hand, darting into piece a broken thread, lingers for a fraction of a second too long. There's a flash of pain, a sickening crunch. You snatch your hand back, and your finger is a mess of blood and mangled flesh. The nail is gone, the tip crushed. The pain is sharp and overwhelming, a bright, hot signal of damage. But your first thought is not about the injury itself. Your first thought is fear. Fear of the overlooker. You try to hide your hand, to stifle the cry that rises in your throat. But Mr. Grier sees everything. He is at your side in an instant, his face a mask of annoyance, not concern. What now? He barks, his voice laced with impatience. He glances at your hand, his expression unchanging. Get it right. Get back to work. This is the standard procedure for what is considered a small injury. You are not sent to a doctor. You are not given any medical attention beyond what you can provide for yourself. You walk to the corner of the vast, rolling room, where a bucket of murky, cold water sits. This is your infirmary. You plunge your bleeding hand into the water. The cold shock doing little to numb the throbbing pain. The water, used by countless others for the same purpose, is probably teeming with bacteria. But it's all there is. You are given a piece of rough cotton rag, torn from a waste bale. You wrap it tightly around your finger. The pressure a feeble attempt to stop the bleeding. The white rag quickly turns red, then a dirty brown as it soaks up the blood and grime. This is your medical care. a dirty rag and a bucket of contaminated water. The expectation is clear: you will return to your post immediately. You walk back to the spinning mule, your hand held stiffly at your side, throbbing in time with the thumping of the steam engine. You must now continue your work as a piecer, a job that requires two nimble hands, with only one fully functional one. You learn to compensate, to use your uninjured hand for the delicate twisting, while your damaged hand is used clumsily to guide the thread. Every movement sends a fresh jolt of pain up your arm, but you do not stop. To stop is to be useless, and to be useless is to be discarded. This complete lack of medical provision is a defining feature of the early industrial workplace. The concept of occupational health or employer responsibility for injuries was generations away. The mainstream historical narrative confirms that workers were entirely on their own when it came to their health and safety. Now consider a small, almost bureaucratic detail that makes this situation even more cruel: the idea of fines. Not only is there no care provided, but you can actually be punished for getting injured. Many factories had a system of fines for damaging materials or disrupting production. If your injury caused you to bleed on the cotton, spoiling the pure white fibers, you could have a few pence docked from your already minuscule wages. If the machine had to be stopped because of your accident, you could be fined for the lost production time. So not only do you suffer the pain and the risk of infection, but you are also financially penalized for the privilege of being maimed by the factory's equipment. Historians debate the underlying philosophy of this system. Was it pure, unadulterated cruelty, or did it stem from the harsh economic logic of early capitalism? Some might argue, from a purely detached perspective, that the factory owners saw the workers, especially child apprentices, as interchangeable parts. If one part broke, you didn't fix it, you simply replaced it with a new one from the vast, readily available supply of poor and desperate people. Investing in medical care for a replaceable component made no economic sense in this brutal calculus. Others argue that this view is too simplistic, that it ignores a fundamental lack of empathy, a willed blindness to the suffering that the system created. You work through the pain. The rag on your finger becomes stiff with dried blood. You know the real danger is yet to come. In a few days, the throbbing might get worse. The finger might swell, turn an angry red, and become hot to the touch. This is infection. In a world without antibiotics, even a small, uncared for wound like yours could be a death sentence. You might develop a fever, the infection spreading up your arm, poisoning your entire system. You watch the other children, and you see the scars they carry, the missing fingertips, the crookedly healed bones, the puckered white lines on their skin that tell stories of past encounters with the machinery. These scars are a kind of uniform, a physical record of their service to the factory. Your crushed finger is not a dramatic, life-altering event in the eyes of the factory. It is a minor inconvenience, a momentary disruption. But for you, it is a profound lesson. It teaches you that your body is not your own. It is a tool, and a disposable one at that. It teaches you that your pain is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the relentless, hungry rhythm of the machine, and your ability to keep up with it, no matter how broken you are. The factory is remaking you, not just on the inside, but on the outside as well. Your body, still in its crucial years of growth, is being permanently reshaped by the unnatural demands of your labor. You are becoming a creature of the machine, your skeleton twisting to accommodate its needs. This physical deformation is a slow, insidious process. You don't notice it day by day, but over months and years, the changes become undeniable. As a piecer, you spend your entire 16-hour days tubed over the spinning mule. You are constantly leaning forward, your spine curved, your shoulders hunched. Your body is trying to grow, but it is doing so within the invisible confines of this forced posture. The result is what becomes a common sight among factory children: a permanently curved spine and rounded shoulders. You can't stand up completely straight anymore. Even when you are away from the machine, your body retains the shape of its labor. This condition, known as kyphosis, is one of the most visible and well-documented physical effects of factory work on children. But the damage doesn't stop with your back. Your legs are also being deformed. Standing and pacing on the hard wooden floors for 16 hours a day puts immense pressure on your growing leg bones. Your diet, deficient in calcium and vitamin D, has already made your bones soft and pliable. The combination is devastating. Your legs begin to bow outwards or inwards, creating the distinctive knock knees or bolus that mark you as a factory child. When you walk, you have a slight waddle, a gait dictated by the malformation of your limbs. These deformities were so common that they were considered an occupational trademark. In parliamentary inquiries, doctors and witnesses frequently described the physical appearance of textile workers, noting their stunted growth, pale complexions, and, most distinctively, their twisted limbs. This is the mainstream historical understanding of the physical toll of child labor. Now for a more specific and less-known deformity, one that was particular to the scavengers. The job you held when you first arrived. Scavengers spent their days crawling and squatting under the low clearance of the machinery. This constant pressure on their knee joints, combined with malnutrition, often led to a condition where the knees would swell, becoming permanently enlarged and misshapen. It was a painful condition that made walking difficult, even after they grew out of the scavenger role. It was a physical scar left by their very first job in the mill. The existence of these deformities was a major point of contention in the public and political spheres. Reformers presented these twisted skeletons as living proof of the factory system's evil. They would have former child laborers stand before parliamentary committees. Their contorted bodies are silent, powerful testimony against their former employers. Factory owners and their allies had a range of countergameston. Some flatly denied the problem, claiming the children were healthy and strong. Others admitted the deformities existed but attributed them to other causes, such as rickets from their impoverished home lives before they ever came to the factory. A particularly cynical argument was that these deformities were not a sign of suffering, but a sign of the children's admirable dedication to their work. The twisted limbs were a badge of honor for their industrial service. Historians still analyze these arguments, seeing them as a desperate attempt to normalize a horrific reality and to shift blame away from the profitable system they had created. Was it possible that some owners genuinely believed their own propaganda? Or was it all a calculated public relations campaign? The answer likely lies somewhere in the murky middle. You see these changes in yourself when you catch a rare glimpse of your reflection in a grimy window pane. You see the slump in your shoulders, the slight but definite curve in your legs. You see it in the other children, a shared, silent affliction. You are all being molded into a new shape, a shape that is weaker, more pained, and less human than the one you were born with. Your body becomes a living record of your labor, the stunted height from malnutrition, the pale skin from a lack of sunlight, the rounded back from stooping, the bowed legs from standing, the hearing loss from the noise, the scarred lungs from the dust, the missing fingertips from the machines. You are a walking encyclopedia of industrial trauma. The factory owners promised your parents that the work would give you a trade, a future. They did not mention that it would do so by taking parts of your body, by bending your very bones to its will. The factory doesn't just demand your time, it demands your skeleton. And it is a debt your body will be forced to pay for the rest of your life. There is one day of the week when the great steam engine falls silent, Sunday. In a life dictated by the relentless shriek of the factory bell, the silence of Sunday morning is a profound and strange experience. It is your only holiday, your single, precious day of rest from the 16-hour grind. But it is not a day of freedom. You wake up not to the factory bell, but to the sun. If it manages to penetrate the smoggy sky, the first thing you notice is the quiet, the constant, bone-shaking rumble of the mill is gone. The silence is so complete it feels loud, leaving a ringing in your ears that is now unobscured by the machinery's roar. For a few blessed moments, there is peace. But the day is not yours to do with as you please. The factory owner, your master, still controls your time. For many owners, particularly those who were devoutly religious or wanted to appear so, Sunday was a day for mandatory moral and religious instruction. After a slightly more substantial breakfast, perhaps the gruel is a little thicker, or there's a rumor of bacon bits in the broth, you are marched not to the factory, but to the local church. This was a common practice, part of the factory owner's stated duty to the parish apprentices under his care. He was not just responsible for their work, but also for their souls. Attending church was non-negotiable. It served a purpose as it demonstrated the owner's piousness and charity to the community, and it was meant to instill in you the virtues of obedience, humility, and respect for your superiors. The sermons you listen to often emphasize the importance of hard work, the sin of idleness, and the divine wisdom of the existing social order. You are taught that your place in life has been ordained by God, and to question it is to question Him. You sit on the hard wooden pew, your body still aching from the week's labor. The church is cold, and your threadbare clothes offer little warmth. You struggle to stay awake. The vicar's voice drones on, a low hum that is far more sleep-inducing than the clatter of the looms. You see other children nodding off, their heads lolling onto their chests, only to be jabbed awake by a watchful apprentice master or a churchwarden. Even in the house of God, sleep is a punishable offense. Now for a peculiar, and somewhat hypocritical, detail about your Sunday. While the factory's main production machinery is silent, not all work necessarily ceases. Sunday was often the designated day for cleaning and maintenance. The machines had to be oiled, the floors swept of a week's worth of accumulated filth, and minor repairs made. And who do you think was tasked with this light work often? It was the children. You might spend your Sunday morning not in church, but on your hands and knees, scrubbing the greasy floorboards or cleaning the complex inner workings of a silent machine. This practice was often criticized by reformers, as it clearly violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the Sabbath. This was the so-called Sabbath work controversy. Historians still debate the motivations behind this mandatory religious observance. Was it a genuine, if misguided, attempt by factory owners to provide moral guidance to their young charges, or was it a cynical to love social control? A way to use religion to enforce discipline and quell any thoughts of rebellion. Many owners were indeed deeply religious men who saw their factories as part of a divine plan for national greatness. They may have genuinely believed that teaching you scripture was an act of kindness. However, it's hard to separate this piety from the convenient fact that the lessons learned in church obedience, acceptance of one's lot, were perfectly aligned with the needs of the factory floor. After church, the afternoon is, for the first time all week, mostly your own. But what can you do with this freedom? You are confined to the factory compound. You are too exhausted for play. Most children simply find a spot in the yard or the apprentice house and collapse into a state of semi-conscious lethargy. You might sit in the weak sunshine, feeling its warmth on your face, a rare and treasured sensation. You might talk with the other children, your voices low and hoarse, a strange novelty after a week of shouted communication over the roar of the machines. This is your holiday, a few hours of exhausted quiet, bookended by compulsory religious indoctrination and the looming certainty of Monday morning. It is not a day of rejuvenation. It is just a brief pause, a moment to let the deeper stakes subside before the cycle begins again. The silence of Sunday is not the sound of freedom. It is the sound of the beast taking a breath before it roars back to life. You are a worker, so you are paid. That is the letter of the law and the nature of your contract. But you will likely never feel the satisfying weight of a coin in your hand. Your wages exist mostly as a series of numbers in the factory owner's ledger book, a phantom sum that is whittled away to almost nothing before you ever see it. You are a victim of the truck system. Here's how it works. At the end of the week or month, you are presented with a tally of your earnings. It's a pitifully small amount, calculated based on the piecework you've completed or a set daily rate. From this sum, a series of deductions are made. First, There's the cost of your lodging in the crowded, filthy prentice house. Then, there's the cost of your meager food, the watery gruel and dry oatcakes. There might be deductions for the mandatory church attendance, or for the rudimentary schooling that some owners claim to provide. And then there are the fines. A fine for being a minute late. A fine for talking. A fine for leaving your post without permission. A fine for dropping a tool. A fine for spoiling cotton with your blood after an injury. The list of punishable offences is long and arbitrary, enforced at the whim of the overlooker. By the time all these deductions are made, your impressive-sounding wage has shrunk to a few pennies, or in many cases, to nothing at all. This system of fines and deductions is a well-documented method of labour control. It kept workers in a state of perpetual debt and dependence, ensuring they could never save enough to leave. But the most insidious part of the truck system comes now. Whatever small amount is left over is often not paid to you in cash. Instead, you are given scrip, a voucher, or a token that is only valid in one place, the factory shop. This shop, conveniently, is also owned by the factory owner. It is the only place you are allowed to buy anything. This is the infamous company store, or Tommy's shop. Here, you can exchange your hard-earned scrip for goods, but the prices are exorbitant. A loaf of bread that costs 2 pence in the open market might cost 3 or 4 in the Tommy shop. The quality of the goods is invariably poor. The flour is old. The bacon is rancid. The tea is mostly dust. You have no choice. Your scrip is worthless anywhere else. You must buy his goods at his prices. This brings us to a particularly bizarre and exploitative aspect of the truck system, the forced purchase. Sometimes, it wasn't enough to simply overcharge you, to get rid of unwanted or spoiled stock. The owner might make certain purchases mandatory. Part of your wages might be paid not in scrip, but in coin, that is, in goods themselves. You might find that your week's wages consist of a sack of rotting potatoes or a length of shoddy cloth that you have no use for. It was a way for the owner to turn his own unsaleable garbage into your payment. You were, in effect, a dumping ground for his bad business decisions. The legality and morality of the truck system were fiercely debated throughout the 19th century. Factory owners defended it with a paternalistic argument. They claimed that if they paid their workers in cash, the feckless poor would only squander it on drink and vice. The truck system, they argued, ensured that the workers' money was spent sensibly on food and necessities for their families. It was, they claimed, a system designed for the workers' own good, reformers and workers, of course. So for what it was a fraudulent system designed to claw back wages and create a captive market, trapping workers in a cycle of debt. Historians today universally recognize it as a tool of exploitation, but still study the ways in which owners justified it, revealing a complex mindset that blended greed with a genuine, if condescending, belief in their own moral superiority. As a parish apprentice, you are at the very bottom of this system. The deductions for your food and lodging usually consume your entire wage. You receive no scrip, no tokens, nothing. Your labor is exchanged for the barest subsistence. You see the adult workers, the free hands, queuing up at the Tommy shop, their faces grim as they exchange their vouchers for overpriced, substandard good. You see the trap they are in. You learn that your work has a monetary value, but that this value will never belong to you. It is an abstract concept, a number in a book that represents the wealth you are creating for someone else. The wage system, which should be a symbol of your contribution and your freedom, is instead just another chain, another lock on the door of your cage. It is a scam, a cruel joke played at your expense, and you are not allowed to laugh. At the end of your 16-hour day, you do not go home. The word home implies a place of comfort, family, and refuge. You go to the apprentice house, which is not a home but a human warehouse. It is a place designed for the sole purpose of storing labor units overnight as cheaply as possible. The apprentice house is usually a long, low building squatting in the shadow of the main mill, often within the same high, guarded walls. It is stark and functional, built from the same cheap brick as the factory. The windows are small, bare, and often barred, less to keep intruders out and more to keep you in. You push open the heavy door and are hit by a wave of foul air. It's a thick, cloying mixture of smells, stale straw, unwashed bodies, damp wool, and the ever-present sour tang of the privy bucket in the corner. The main room is a cavernous, dimly lit space. There are no partitions, no private spaces. There is only a vast, open floor, covered with what are euphemistically called beds. These are not beds in any sense you might recognize. They are crude wooden frames, little more than shallow boxes, filled with loose straw, if you're unlucky, rags and cotton waste. This bedding is rarely, if ever, changed. It is lumpy, dusty, and crawling with lice and fleas, which are a constant, itching torment. The most shocking feature of this arrangement is the crowding. The beds are crammed together, and you do not get a bed to yourself. You sleep 2, 3, or even 4 to a bed, a tangled mass of exhausted bodies. There is no segregation of the sexes in many of the older, thus regulated mills. Boys and girls are housed together in the same room, a practice that horrified middle-class reformers but was a simple economic reality for the factory owner. This leads to one of the most grimly practical and bizarre systems of the apprentice house, the hotbed system. The factory runs 24 hours a day, with a day shift and a night shift. The apprentice house, however, only has enough beds for half the total number of children, so you don't even have your own designated sleeping space. When your shift ends, you tumble into a bed that has just been vacated by a child who is starting their shift. The straw is still warm from their body heat, hence the name hot bed. You are sleeping in another person's warm. They're wet, they're grime. The bed, like the factory machinery, never gets a chance to rest. It is in constant, rotating use. The living conditions in these apprentice dormitories were a central focus for early factory investigators. Their reports to Parliament are filled with descriptions of the filth, the crowding, and the lack of sanitation. These descriptions were powerful weapons for reformers, painting a picture of neglect that was impossible for the public to ignore. This is the mainstream historical understanding of factory housing. Historians still debate the extent to which these conditions were the norm. Were there model factory owners who provided clean, well-regulated dormitories? Yes, a few, like Robert Owen at New Lanark, famously did. They saw good housing as a wise investment in the health and productivity of their workforce. However, the overwhelming evidence suggests that these men were the rare exception. For most, the apprentice house was just another line item on a balance sheet, an expense to be minimized at all costs. The debate, then, is not about whether the horrific conditions existed, but whether the few good examples are enough to soften the overall condemnation of the system. You find your designated spot, your share of a warm, louse-infested bed. You huddle together with your bedmates for warmth, a small island of humanity in the vast, impersonal room. There is a supervisor, often an older woman, who watches over the dormitory, enforcing a strict curfew and silence. Her job is to ensure that this brief period of rest is as orderly, uncontrolled as the workday itself. There is no privacy. You eat, sleep, and exist in the full view of 50, 100, 200 other children. The concept of personal space is a forgotten luxury. The only time you are truly alone is inside your own head. And even that is a space filled with the phantom roar of the machinery and the dull ache of exhaustion. This is your domestic life. Not a home, but a barracks. Not a family, but a shift crew. You are as much a part of the factory's infrastructure as the steam engine or the spinning mules. You are housed, chilled, and work. A biological machine kept in storage, waiting for the bell to signal the start of another cycle. The apprentice house is the ultimate expression of the factory's logic, a place where human beings are reduced to their most basic economic function. You live under a system of total, oppressive control. Your every moment is scheduled, your every action scrutinized. To survive is to be compliant. But even in the most brutal regimes, the human spirit finds small, secret ways to rebel. You will not lead an uprising. You will not burn the factory down. But you will learn the subtle art of quiet rebellion. This is not an organized movement. It is a collection of individual, unspoken acts of defiance. It is a way of clawing back a tiny piece of your time, your energy, your humanity. The most common form of rebellion is simply stealing time. It's a practice the workers call fiddling or soldiering. It means working just slowly enough to not attract the overlooker's attention. You learn the precise rhythm of your machine and the precise rhythm of your overlooker's patrol. You learn to look busy while doing very little. You might fumble with a broken thread for just a second longer than necessary, or take an extra moment to scan for a non-existent flaw. Each stolen second is a victory. Another common act is the secret conversation. Talking is strictly forbidden, a punishable offense, but you develop a way of communicating that is almost invisible. A quick whisper when the overlooker's back is turned. A shared glance that conveys a whole sentence of frustration or solidarity. A slight nod of the head. These tiny moments of connection are a lifeline. They are a reminder that you are not just a solitary call, but part of a community of suffering. Then there is the rebellion of sabotage. This is a riskier game, but one that offers a greater sense of satisfaction. It is never overt. You would never be caught deliberately breaking a machine, but perhaps you accidentally let a tool slip into a gear, causing a minor jam that stops the machine for a precious few minutes. Perhaps the thread you piece back together is just a little bit weak, so that it will break again somewhere down the line, causing a problem for someone else, creating a small disruption in the relentless flow of production. This brings us to a peculiar and very specific form of industrial sabotage known as cat making. A cat was a small, homemade object, often a ball of waste cotton wrapped tightly around a metal nut or a stone. If thrown with skill into the delicate parts of a spinning mule, it could cause a significant and hard-to-diagnose malfunction. Finding the cat and fixing the damage could take hours, a period of blessed, unscheduled rest for the workers in that section. It was a high-stakes act of defiance. If you were caught, the punishment would be severe. But the potential reward, an afternoon of silence, was a powerful temptation. The existence and extent of worker sabotage is a topic of ongoing historical debate. Traditional labor history often focuses on organized resistance strikes, unions, and political action. But more recent scholarship has explored these everyday forms of resistance, the weapons of the weak. Did these small acts of sabotage have any real economic impact on the factories, or were they primarily psychological acts? A way for workers to assert their agency and dignity in a system designed to strip them of both. Some historians argue they were a crucial precursor to more organized labor movements, a training ground for collective action. Others see them as largely futile gestures, small acts of vandalism that did little to change the fundamental power dynamics of the factory. You also learn to exploit the system's own rules. You might feign illness, exaggerating a call for a stomachicae. The line between genuine sickness and feigned sickness is blurry anyway. You are always in a state of semi-illness. A successful performance might turn you a few hours of rest, a small price to pay for the overlooker's suspicion. You learn to hide things. A small, smooth stone you found in the yard, a piece of brightly colored thread, a button. These worthless objects become treasured possessions, hidden in a crack in the floorboards or a loose brick in the apprentice house wall. They are a secret world of your own, a tiny sphere of existence that the factory does not own. These acts of quiet rebellion are your survival mechanism. They are not about overthrowing the system. They are about surviving it with your mind, if not your body, intact. They are a way of saying, you own my time, you own my labor, but you do not own my will. Each stolen moment, each whispered word, each small act of sabotage is a declaration that you are still a human being. In the face of the overwhelming, crushing power of the machine, these tiny, secret acts of defiance are all the freedom you have. The thought comes to you in the dead of night, a terrifying, unseductive whisper in the dark of the apprentice house. Escape. The word itself is a jolt, a flash of impossible light in the grey monotony of your existence. It's a fantasy you entertain, a secret narrative you construct in your mind during the long, luring hours on the factory floor. What would it take first? You would have to get out of the factory compound. The gates are locked and guarded. The walls are high. You watch the comings and goings, studying the routines. You notice a low section of wall at the back, near the foul-smelling privy pits. Perhaps, under the cover of a moon this night, you could scale it. It would be a risk. Fall could mean a broken leg, and discovery would mean a brutal flogging and being shackled to your machine for a week. But getting out is the easy part. The real challenge comes after. You are a child, alone, in a sprawling, hostile city you do not know. You have no money, no food, and the clothes on your back are a factory uniform, marking you as an escaped apprentice. Every hand would be against you. The law is not on your side. As a parish apprentice, you are legally bound to your master. Running away is a crime. Your master would place an advertisement in the local newspaper. This is a well-documented historical fact. These ads would offer a reward for your capture and return, and they would often include a detailed, and usually unflattering, description of you as a sullen disposition, is small for his age, walks with a limp. You would be hunted, not as a lost child, but as a piece of stolen property. Even ordinary citizens would have an incentive to turn you in. The reward, though small, could be a significant sum for a poor family. A parish constable who found you would have a duty to return you. There is no one you could trust. Where would you even go back to the countryside? It's 100 miles away. A journey you cannot even imagine. You have no memory of the route. No map. You would have to beg or steal to survive on the road, risking transportation being sent to a penal colony in Australia if caught. The city itself offers its own dangers. You could try to lose yourself in the teeming, anonymous slums. But what then? You might fall in with a gang of street children. A life of petty crime and constant violence. You could try to find other work, but who would hire a runaway apprentice with no references? This brings us to a strange and specific danger of urban life for a runaway, the resurrection men, or body snatchers. In the early 19th century, medical schools had a high demand for cadavers for anatomical study, but a very limited legal supply. This created a gruesome black market. A lone, vulnerable child sleeping on the streets was an easy target. While most of their work involved robbing fresh graves, they were not above murder if the opportunity arose. It was a rare but terrifyingly real risk of life on the margins. The dilemma of whether to run away is a silent, internal debate for you and thousands of other apprentices. Historians who study the letters and autobiographies of former factory children find this theme recurring again and again. They weigh the known, daily misery of the factory against the terrifying, unknown dangers of freedom. Was the certainty of food and shelter, however wretched, better than the uncertainty of starvation and violence on the streets? Was a brutal calculation with no good answer. The very fact that so many children did attempt to escape, despite the overwhelming odds, is a powerful testament to the sheer desperation of their lives in the mills. You lie on your straw pallet, the snores and whimpers of the other children around you, and you play the game in your head. You plan your route. You imagine the feeling of the cold night air on your face, the thrill of being outside the walls. You think about the taste of real freedom. But then, reality floods back in. You think of the strap. You think of the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. You think of the high walls and the locked gates. The fantasy of escape is a comfort. A small, private world you can retreat to, but the fear of the consequences is a powerful chain. For now, you do nothing. The dream of escape is both a torment and a solace. It's a reminder that there is a world outside the factory, even if it's a world you may never reach. The thought is a tiny, flickering candle in the suffocating darkness of your life. You nurture it. You protect it, because on the days when the despair is overwhelming, it is the only light you have. One day, something unusual happens. The rhythm of the factory is disrupted, not by a broken machine or an accident, but by the arrival of strangers. They are not factory men. They are dressed in the clean, formal coats of gentlemen from London. Their faces are serious, and they carry notebooks and pens. One of them is a doctor. His black bag is ranging for an object in this world of iron and grease. The overlooker, Mr. Groyer, is suddenly a different person. He is no longer the swaggering tyrant of the factory floor. He is servile, obsequious, his face fixed in a grimace of respect. He bows and scrapes, answering the gentleman's questions with a nervous energy. The factory owner himself appears, his fine waistcoat a jarring splash of color in the grime. He leads the visitors on a tour, his voice a smooth, reasonable baritone, explaining the miraculous workings of his enterprise. These men are members of a parliamentary select committee, a royal commission. They are investigators, sent from the heart of government to inquire into the conditions of factory labor. Their arrival is a result of years of agitation by social reformers who have been publishing pamphlets, giving speeches, and lobbying politicians about the horrors they've witnessed in industrial towns. Your factory has been chosen for an inspection. This is a pivotal moment, a key part of the mainstream historical narrative of factory reform. These investigations, such as the famous Sadler Committee of 1832, were instrumental in changing public opinion and paving the way for new laws. The testimony they collected provided the irrefutable evidence of the system's brutality. The factory owner puts on a show for the visitors. He points out the light and easy nature of the work. He explains how the factory has rescued children like you from poverty and idleness. He might even have arranged for a special meal to be served on this day. A pot of thick to show how well fed his apprentices are. The factory is clean, the worst of the filth swept away. It is a carefully staged performance. Then, the investigator does something unexpected. He turns to you. He wants to ask you some questions. This is a moment of immense, terrifying choice. The factory owner and Mr. Groyer are standing right there, their eyes boring into you. The investigator asks you about your hours. He asks you about your food. He asks if you are ever beaten. What do you say? You know the truth. You know the story of the 16-hour day, the watery gruel, the ever-present strap. But you also know the price of telling that truth. The moment these gentlemen leave, you will be alone again with Mr. Groyer. The punishment for speaking out would be unimaginable. You have seen other children question. You have seen them lie, their eyes downcast, muttering that they are treated well, that they are happy with their work. It is a safe answer. It is the answer that guarantees your survival. This brings us to a specific, challenging aspect of this process for historians: the problem of testimony. When reading the transcripts of these commissions, how do we know what is true? The records are full of contradictory evidence. For every child who bravely described their beatings and starvation, there are others who claimed conditions were good. Factory owners would often carefully select the children to be interviewed, coaching them beforehand on what to say. This practice of witness tampering was rampant. Historians must therefore become detectives. They cross-reference testimonies, look for patterns of coercion, and weigh the evidence from doctors and independent observers against the statements of the owners and their curated witnesses. The debate continues: how much of the positive testimony was genuine, and how much was a product of fear and intimidation. It's a fundamental question about how we read and interpret the voices of the past. The investigator's eyes are kind. He seems to genuinely want to know the truth. He asks you to show him your hands. He asks about your back. The doctor might gently probe your bowed legs or listen to the rattle in your chest. You are caught between two worlds: the world of these powerful, well-meaning men who promise of aid, distant hope of change, and the immediate, brutal reality of the factory and the overlooker's strap. To trust the former is an act of incredible faith. To bow to the latter is an act of rational self-preservation. You look at Mr. Groyer's face. His expression is a mask of neutrality, but you can see the threat in his eyes. It's a silent, powerful command. You open your mouth. The words that come out are small and quiet. You say the hours are long, but manageable. You say the food is enough. You say Mr. Guire is strict, but fair. You lie. As the investigators make their notes and move on to the next child, you are left with a hollow, bitter taste in your mouth. It's the taste of shame and powerlessness. You had a chance to speak, to tell your story to someone who might listen, and you were too afraid. But as you watch the investigators leave, you see a flicker of something new in the eyes of the other children. The questions have been asked. The silence has been broken, if only for a moment. A tiny, dangerous seed has been planted, the idea that this world, your world, can be questioned, and that, in itself, is a revolution. The investigators are gone, and the factory returns to its brutal normal. The brief illusion of scrutiny vanishes, and Mr. Guire's strap seems to swing with a renewed vigor, as if to punish you all for the brief moment of hope the visit inspired. It feels as though nothing has changed, but outside the high, soot-stained walls of the factory, something is stirring. Your story, or a version of it, is beginning to be told. You don't see it directly. Of course, you are illiterate. A newspaper is a meaningless collection of black squiggles. But you hear whispers. You hear them from the free hands. The adult workers who live in the town and have some contact with the outside world. They talk about what they've seen in the papers. The stories being printed about the parliamentary commissions. Your life, which felt so small, so isolated and insignificant, is becoming a matter of public discussion. The anonymous suffering inside the factory walls is being translated into words and printed by the thousand. The testimonies, the ones that were ruined, the ones that were coerced, are being read aloud in pubs, in parlours, in the halls of Parliament. People who have never seen a spinning mule are learning about the scavenger's dance, about the 16-hour day, about the systems and the straps. This is a crucial phase in the history of social reform, the power of the press. Newspapers and pamphlets were the social media of your day, and they were powerful engines of change. Publications like the Times of London began to report on the findings of the commissions, shocking their middle-class readership with tales of industrial cruelty. This reporting was often accompanied by another, perhaps even more powerful, a form of media, the novel. This was the age of the social problem novel. Writers like Charles Dickens and Elizabeth Gaskell began to weave the grim realities of industrial life into their fiction. You hear someone mention a book called Oliver Twist, about a parish boy who suffers in a workhouse. Though not set in a factory, his story of institutional abuse resonates with your own. Later, a book called Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell will paint a vivid picture of life and poverty in a city like Manchester. These novels took the dry, statistical evidence of the commissions and gave it a human face, a narrative, to hope. They allowed readers not just to know about the suffering, but to feel it. This emotional connection was vital in building the political will for change. Now for a specific, and slightly strange, aspect of this public outcry, the poetry. It wasn't just newspapers and novels. The plight of the factory child became a popular subject for poets. The most famous of these is Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poem, The Cry of the Children. You will never read the words, but if you could, you would hear your own experience echoed in her verses. Do ye hear the children weeping? O my brothers, they are weeping in the playtime of the others, in the country of the free. This poem, and others like it, were recited, memorized, and shared, becoming anthems for the reform movement. The historical debate around this media explosion is fascinating. Did these writers and journalists accurately portray the reality of factory life? Or did they engage in sensationalism to sell papers and books? Some historians argue that the fictional accounts, in their effort to create compelling drama, sometimes exaggerated the worst abuses, creating a caricature of the evil factory owner that wasn't always fair. They suggest that the reality was often a more banal, systemic cruelty rather than the work of mustached-whirling villains. Others argue that any exaggeration was a necessary tool to break through public apathy. The situation was so extreme that it required an equally extreme portrayal to get anyone to pay attention. You can feel the subtle effects of this public discussion even within the factory walls. The overlookers seem more wary, quicker to look over their shoulders. The owner makes more of an effort to maintain a facade of decency, at least when there are any visitors. The whispers among the workers become more hopeful. They talk of a new law, a 10-hour bill that reformers are fighting for. The idea that powerful people far away in London are talking about you is a profound and dizzying thought. It transforms your suffering from a private, personal hell into a public, political problem. You are no longer just a victim, you are evidence. Your twisted back, your scarred lungs, your missing fingertip, they have become data points in a national argument. You don't know if any of it will lead to real change. The forces of industry and profit are immense. And you are very, very small. But for the first time, you feel you are not entirely alone. Your silent screams have found a voice, and the sound is beginning to echo far beyond the factory gates. The page has become a weapon, and your tears are the ink. The whispers you heard in the factory aisles, the faint hope stirred by the investigator's visit, slowly, agonizingly, begins to take shape. It arrived not as a sudden liberation, but as a rumor that solidifies into a notice stacked on the factory gate. It is a new law, the Factory Act. The passage of the first meaningful factory legislation is a landmark event in 19th century British history. It represents the first time the state systematically intervened in the relationship between employer and employee, prioritizing human welfare over the absolute freedom of contract. The most significant of these early laws was the Factory Act of 1833. This act is not the glorious revolution you might have dreamed of. It is a messy, compromised, and, in many ways, deeply flawed piece of legislation. But it is a start. It is a crack in the fortress wall of industrial indifference. Here are the key provisions you would learn about, not by reading the act, but by the changes, however small, you see in your daily routine. The act prohibits the employment of children under the age of 9. Since you are already older than that, this doesn't affect you directly, but you see the very youngest of the scavengers, the 6 and 7-year-olds, disappear from the factory floor. It's a strange and welcome sight. For children between 9 and 13, the act limits the workday to a maximum of 9 hours. For young people between 13 and 18, the limit is 12 hours. Your 16-hour day is, in theory, illegal now. The factory owner is forced to adjust the shifts. Your workday is reduced. It is still a punishingly long day by any modern standard. But the difference between 12 hours and 16 hours is the difference between collapse and mere exhaustion. It is a gift of 4 hours of your life given back to you each day. Crucially, the Act of 1833 did something unprecedented. It established a professional factory inspectorate. These were paid, independent government employees whose sole job was to enforce the new law. They had the power to enter any factory, at any time, to inspect records and interview workers. This is the mainstream historical importance of the Act. It wasn't just a law, it had an enforcement mechanism. The lone investigator who visited you before was part of a temporary committee. These new inspectors are a permanent presence. However, the reality of enforcement was complicated. This brings us to a peculiar, almost comical, problem the inspectors faced proving a child's age. There was no national system of birth registration yet. A parent, or a factory owner, could simply lie about a child's age to keep them working longer hours. Inspectors had to become amateur forensic experts. They would look at a child's teeth, trying to guess their age like a farmer checking a horse. They developed height standards, which were often unreliable due to the stunted growth of the children themselves. This age certification issue became a constant cat-and-mouse game between the inspectors and the mill owners. The historical debate around the effectiveness of the early factory acts is ongoing. Skeptics point out that there were only 4 inspectors appointed for the entire country. a laughably small number to oversee thousands of mills. They argue that owners found countless loopholes. For example, to get around the 9-hour limit for the youngest children, some owners used a relay system, working one group of children for the morning and another for the afternoon, keeping the machinery running continuously while technically complying with the law. This made the inspectors' job of tracking hours almost impossible. Optimists, on the other hand, argue that even with its flaws, the 1833 Act was a watershed moment. It established the principle of state intervention. The existence of the inspectors, however few, created a new culture of accountability. The factory owner was no longer an absolute monarch in his domain. He now had to answer to an outside authority. This, they argue, was a profound psychological shift. You experience the law's imperfections firsthand. Your workday is shorter, but the pace of the work is increased to make up for the lost time. The overlooker is even more demanding, pushing you to produce the same amount in 12 hours as you used to in 16. The law also mandates 2 hours of schooling per day for the youngest children, but the quality of this schooling is often a farce. The schoolroom might be a coal cellar, and the teacher might be an illiterate adult worker who has been given the job because he is too old or infirm to work on the machines. You might spend 2 hours staring at a book you can't read, which is better than working, but it is hardly the enlightenment the reformers envisioned. Despite all this, something has fundamentally changed. The factory is no longer a place outside the law. There is a rule book, however flimsy, and there are referees, however overworked. The glimmer of light you saw is no longer just a distant star, it has become a small, flickering lamp, casting a weak but steady glow into the darkest corners of the factory. It is not the sun, but for now, it is enough. The world is changing around you, but the arguments about your existence rage on. In the pubs, the parlours, and the debating halls of London, your small, aching body has become a symbol in a much larger ideological battle. You are the human cost of a concept you've never heard of: progress. You might overhear a conversation between the factory owner and a visitor, or catch snippets of a newspaper article being read aloud by a literate worker. The words are big and abstract: laissez-faire, free market, national prosperity, but you slowly piece together the essence of the argument. It is an argument that frames your suffering as unnecessary, if unfortunate, part of a grand and glorious project. This is the classic defense of the industrial system, the mainstream justification used by factory owners and their political allies. They argue that the unfettered growth of industry is the engine of Britain's greatness. The factories, with their incredible productivity, are creating wealth on a scale never before seen in human history. This wealth, they claim, strengthens the nation, funds the navy, and builds the empire. Britain is leading the world, and the factories are the heart of that leadership. They argue that any attempt to regulate this engine, to interfere with the natural laws of economics, is a dangerous folly. If the government places too many restrictions on factory owners, limiting work hours, mandating safety equipment, raising wages, then profits will fall. If profits fall, British factories will no longer be able to compete with their rivals in Europe or America. The factories will close, the source of wealth will dry up, and the entire nation will be poorer and weaker as a result. In this grand narrative, you have a specific, heroic role to play. You are not a victim, you are a soldier on the economic front lines. Your long hours, your meager wages, your dangerous work, these are sacrifices made for the greater good of the nation. Your suffering is the fuel for the engine of progress. It is a necessary evil. You might hear your own life described in cold, mathematical terms. A political economist might argue that while the conditions are regrettable, they are a temporary phase. The system, if left to its own devices, will eventually create so much wealth that everyone, even the poorest, will benefit. Your generation is simply a bridge to a more prosperous future. You are living through the painful birth of a better world. One of the most peculiar and chilling arguments you might encounter is the Malthusian one, based on the theories of Thomas Malthus, Some argued that poverty and high death rates among the poor were not just inevitable, but natural and even beneficial. They believed that the population would always grow faster than the food supply, and that famine, disease, and hardship were nature's way of keeping the population in check. The harsh conditions of the factory, in this view, were simply part of this natural, brutal cycle. To try and alleviate your suffering would be to interfere with the laws of nature, leading to overpopulation and even greater misery down the line. It's an argument that transforms cruelty into a kind of grim, scientific necessity. The historical debate over this price of progress narrative is one of the most fundamental in the study of the Industrial Revolution. For a long time, the dominant view, often called the optimist school, was that, on balance, the Industrial Revolution was a good thing. While acknowledging the hardships, they pointed to long-term trends: rising national income, technological innovation, and an eventual increase in the standard of living for most people. They argued that the short-term pain was worth the long-term gain. More recently, the pessimist school has offered a powerful counter-narrative. They argue that focusing on long-term aggregate data obscures the lived reality of generations of people like you. They ask, what is the moral justification for sacrificing one generation for the benefit of a future one? They point to the deep and lasting social costs: the destruction of communities, the loss of traditional skills, the creation of a permanent urban underclass, and the profound psychological trauma. Was it truly progress if it was built on a foundation of broken bodies and shattered lives? This debate is not just about the past, it's a fundamental question about how we measure the success of a society. Is it purely about economic output? Or are there other, more human, metrics that matter? You are not a philosopher or an economist. You are a child who works in a factory. When you hear these arguments, you don't hear a sophisticated theory. You hear a justification for your pain. You hear powerful men explaining why your aching back and your rattling cough are not only acceptable, but essential. They are telling you that the world is being built on top of you, and that you should be grateful for the honor. The progress they speak of is a great, shining machine, and you are the small, broken gear that makes it turn. Years pass. The relentless rhythm of the factory seasons blends one into the next. You are no longer a child. The apprentice house has been left behind. Your contract fulfilled on your 21st birthday. You are now a free hand, an adult worker, but the factory is still your world. You had a little more money, a rented room in a crowded tenement, but the noise, the dust, and the exhaustion remain your constant companions. You have survived. This, in itself, is a remarkable achievement. You look around the factory floor and see the ghosts of those who didn't. The boy who was crushed by the mule, the girl who succumbed to lung fever, the friend who simply vanished one day, likely turned out for being too sick to work. You are a veteran of a long, quiet war, and you carry its scars, both visible and invisible. Your body is a map of your journey. Your back is permanently stooped, a physical memory of a decade spent leaning over a spinning machine. Your legs ache in the damp weather, the legacy of softened bones and long hours standing. You are hard of hearing, often asking people to repeat themselves, a result of years spent in the deafening roar. And you have the cough, the persistent, rattling cough that never quite leaves your chest, a souvenir from the clouds of cotton dust you breathed in as a child. This is the long-term health outcome for so many factory children, a well-documented legacy of their stolen youth. Even if they survived into adulthood, their life expectancy was significantly lower than that of their rural counterparts. Their bodies were prematurely aged, worn out by the time they reached middle age. You look at the new children coming into the mill. Things are different now. The laws, as flawed as they are, have taken root. The very youngest are gone. The hours are shorter. The schooling, while still pure, is at least a reality. The inspectors, once a novelty, are now familiar, if not always welcome, part of the factory landscape. You see these small changes and feel a strange mixture of emotions. There's relief that their experience will not be as brutal as yours was. But there is also a flicker of something else, a quiet resentment, a sense of injustice for what you endured. Now for a specific, and rather poignant, detail of your later life: the loss of skill. As a child, you learned one task: piecing, scavenging, and you did it over and over again. The factory system, with its intense division of labor, deliberately de-skilled its workers. Unlike an artisan from a previous generation who might learn a whole craft from start to finish, you have learned only one tiny, repetitive part of a process. This makes you vulnerable. If a new machine is invented that can do your job, you have no other trade to fall back on. You are an expert at a single, monotonous task, a skill that has no value outside the factory walls. The question of what happened to the survivors of child labor is a complex one for historians. The data is difficult to track. Many, like you, simply transitioned into adult factory work, their lives circumscribed by the same industrial logic. Some managed to escape, perhaps saving enough to open a small shop or emigrate to America or Australia in search of a new life. Others, broken in health, were unable to continue working and ended their days in the dreaded workhouse, the very institution the factory was supposed to have saved them from. There is an ongoing historical effort to trace these life trajectories, to understand the long-term human consequences of this massive social experiment. Was there upward mobility for the survivors, or did the factory trap them and their descendants in a permanent cycle of industrial poverty? You have a family of your own now. You look at your own children, and you feel a fierce, protective determination. They will not be scavengers. They will not dance with the hungry machines. You will work your fingers to the bone to ensure they get an education, to give them a chance at a life beyond the factory gates. This desire to see the next generation escape is one of the most powerful motivators for the adult workers who begin to organize, to form unions, to fight for better wages and conditions. Your personal memory of suffering becomes the fuel for collective action. You are a survivor. You carry the past in your bones, in your lungs, in the quiet corners of your mind. You can still feel the phantom vibration of the floorboards, still hear the ghostly echo of the machine's roar in a silent room. The factory made you, shaped you, and nearly broke you. Looking back, it's not the cruelty of the overlookers or the hunger that haunts you the most. It's the sheer, relentless waste of it all. The waste of childhood, the waste of health, the waste of human potential, all fed into the machine to keep its great iron heart beating. The world you were born into, the world of the dark satanic mills and the parish apprentice, is slowly fading. It is not gone, but its most brutal edges are being worn down by the relentless friction of reform, technology, and time. You stand, now an elder in your community, and watch the smoke from the chimneys. It seems thinner, less aggressive than it once did. The era of child labor, in its most extreme form, is drawing to a close in Britain. A succession of further factory acts throughout the mid-19th century continued to tighten the restrictions. The 10-hour bill, once a radical dream, eventually became law in 1847, limiting the workday for women and young people. Compulsory education laws, like the Forster Act of 1870, began to make school, not the factory, the primary occupation of children. Technology also played its part. The machines that once required small, nimble fingers were gradually improved. New inventions, like the ring spinning frame, were more automated and less dependent on the specific skills of child PSRS. In a strange twist of fate, the same force of innovation that had once chained you to the machine was now helping to set the next generation free. It became less economically viable to employ children as technology made adult labor more efficient. You walk through the streets of the city that was once your prison. It is still a hard, grimy place, but it is changing. You see public parks being built, libraries opening their doors, sanitation systems being installed to combat the diseases that once ran rampant. The raw, chaotic energy of the early industrial city is being tamed, civilized, made more livable. This transition marks the end of one historical chapter and the beginning of another. The mainstream narrative is that society progressed. The abuses of the early industrial period were recognized and corrected, and a more humane form of capitalism emerged. But the legacy is complex, and this is where the historical debate finds its richest ground. What was the true cost of that progress? You look at your own gnarled hands. You feel the familiar ache in your lungs. The wealth of the nation was built upon the bodies of your generation. The great Victorian city, the sprawling railways, the global empire, all were financed, in part, by your stolen childhood. This is the uncomfortable truth that lies beneath the triumphant narrative of progress. Here's one final, strange detail from this period of transition: the rise of factory tourism. As conditions began to improve and the worst abuses were curtailed, some of the larger, more model factories began to offer tours to the public. Middle-class visitors would pay to walk through the clean, well-ordered factory floors, marveling at the power of the machinery and the efficiency of the workers. They would be shown the well-kept dormitories and the tidy schoolrooms. It was a form of industrial propaganda, a way of showcasing a sanitized, respectable version of the factory system. You, who know the reality of what it was once like, see these tours as a profound and bitter irony. The site of your trauma has become a tourist attraction, a monument to a history that has been scrubbed clean. Historians today continue to wrestle with this legacy. Was the Industrial Revolution a triumph or a tragedy? The answer, of course, is that it was both. It was a period of unprecedented technological innovation and economic growth, but it was also a period of immense social dislocation and human suffering. It created new forms of wealth and new forms of poverty, new opportunities and new kinds of exploitation. There is no simple verdict. The chimneys that once represented a kind of hell on earth are now seen by some as monuments to human ingenuity and resilience. You stand on a hill overlooking the city. The forest of chimneys spread out before you. The sun is setting, and the smoke catches the light, turning it a soft, hazy pink. It's almost beautiful. You think of the child you were, shivering in a cot, rolling towards this city of smoke and promises. You think of the roar of the machines, the taste of oat cake, the sting of the strap. You survived it all. You are a testament to the fact that even in the deepest, darkest furnace of history, the human spirit can endure. It can be bent. It can be scarred. It can be twisted. But it is not easily broken. The silence that falls over the city as the engines stop is no longer the frightening, alien silence of your first Sunday. It is a peaceful silence. It is the sound of a day's work done, and the promise of a quiet, well-earned rest. The air around you begins to soften, the sharp edges of memory blurring into the gentle haze of twilight. The thumping of the great steam engine, which has been the heartbeat of this story, slows down, each beat growing further and further apart. Dump, thump, until it fades into a low, distant hum, like the gentle breathing of a sleeping giant. The roar of the spinning mules dissolves, the clash and the whirring melting away, leaving only the soft whisper of the wind moving through the tall, silent chimneys. You can feel the tension leaving your shoulders, the ache in your back easing as you drift away from the hard, wooden floors of the factory. The gas lights flicker one last time and then extinguish, plunging the vast, empty rooms into a peaceful, velvet darkness. There are no more bells to wake you, no more machines to serve. The long shift is finally over. You are floating now, untethered from the grit and the grime, drifting on a quiet current towards a place of deep and profound rest. The story is over. Let the silence hold you. Let the darkness comfort you. It is time to sleep. The end of the article. Good night.